Welcome. You are listening to Caregiving Secrets with Deborah Greenhut. If you are a family caregiver or expect to be one, and you want to maintain your well-being while caring, then you are in the right place. We need to invent and reinvent family care, and together we're going to do it. My big idea is rational caregiving, and my motto is, let your brain lead your heart. Caregiving Secrets, because friends don't let friends be caregivers alone. Let's do this. I have a question for you. How old is old enough? We're speaking about children as caregivers today, and it's a subject that doesn't get too much attention as we focus on adults, particularly elderly adults who are doing caregiving. We're exploring a growing and unsettling trend in caregiving and labor, where children, especially those in kinship care arrangements for their family, they're stepping into adult roles long before they should, and not just at home. Some are also now legally being allowed or pressured to join the workforce. So let's dive in. You might be surprised to learn this, but there are more than 5.4 million children in the United States acting as caregivers today. Not babysitters, not chore doers, actual caregivers, helping elderly grandparents bathe, feed themselves, or manage medications. Medications they might not be able to manage for themselves, but they're managing for their grandparents. Let that sink in. So many of these children are living in what's called a kinship care arrangement. And this means they're not being raised by their parents, but by extended family, often due to a crisis, incarceration, addiction, or death as examples. Organizations like Generations United and the Annie E. Casey Foundation have been tracking this for years, and their data shows a steady rise in children living in grandfamilies or with older relatives. What happens when a 12-year-old is asked to become the adult in the room? They grow up too fast. They often miss school. They lose touch with their peers and suffer mental health consequences that can last a lifetime. So here's the heartbreaking twist. These same kids, already stretched thin at home, are now being swept into another dangerous trend, the rollback of child labor protections. Let's go back for a minute to 1938. I know most of us weren't around then, but the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in order to protect children from exploitation. It set the minimum age for work and limiting hazardous jobs. Before that, it wasn't uncommon to find 10-year-olds in the mines or working 12-hour shifts in factories. Are we headed back that way? Well, the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, was a triumph of the labor movement. It gave childhood back to children. But now, in over 28 states, bills have been introduced and 12 have already passed that begin to undo those protections. For example, Arkansas eliminated the requirement for children under 16 to get a work permit. Iowa now allows 14 and 15-year-olds to work in meatpacking plants. Florida is pushing to let teenagers work overnight, even during school weeks. What do you think this is going to do with their future prospects? Let me be clear. These laws are not about lemonade stands or after-school jobs. They're about filling labor shortages at the expense of a child's safety, education, and well-being. This isn't just about policy. It's about lived experience. I was a kinship caregiver at 45, and it nearly cost me my health, my marriage, and my business. I can't imagine what that would have been like at age 14. Imagine that happening to a child who hasn't even been promoted from middle school. Supporters of these laws say teens need work experience, that working builds character. I'm sure it does, but at what cost? Are we really asking children to shoulder the emotional burden of caregiving at home and the physical burden of labor outside it? Are we so short-staffed that we're now offering up our youngest citizens to prop up the economy? There's a phrase I keep coming back to, the question, do you want what you have? It's the question I believe we all must ask when we see children carrying loads they never should have picked up that many adults find impossible to bear. I spoke about this in episode 18 of my podcast with Terry Tucker, who's a motivational expert. The difference for him was that everyone in the family pitched in. While he was a young caregiver for his mom, he was not doing this alone. If you think I'm exaggerating, please don't just take my word for it. Professors Kate Andreas and Elora Mukherjee at Columbia Law School are raising the alarms about the exploitation of migrant youth in the U.S., many of whom are pushed into unsafe labor due to poverty and lack of protections. Eric Edmonds, an economist at Dartmouth, has also studied the long-term effects of child labor across the globe. His conclusion? Children who work too early are far more likely to stay in cycles of poverty, underemployment, and illness. They become the citizens we all point the fingers at, but it really wasn't their fault if you consider their history. And at the International Labor Organization, Benjamin Smith is also working to prevent a global rollback of child labor standards because, believe it or not, the U.S. is now being watched as a cautionary tale in this area. We were supposed to be a model of progress. Instead, we're testing how close we can get to the edge without falling back into Dickensian times. This conversation unsettles you. Good. It should. Ask some questions. If you hear about changes to child labor laws in your state, read the fine print. Even if it's just about labor laws, check and see if there's anything relevant to children. And support those kinship caregivers who can't get out of it. Groups like Generations United offer toolkits and policy updates. You can help other families in crisis. Call your legislators. Demand that any rollback of child labor protections be stopped immediately. Only we can prevent this tragedy. And check in on the younger caregivers around you. If they're missing school, sleeping through class, or always tired, there's a story behind that, and some adult ought to be telling it. And finally, childhood should be a time of becoming, not a burden of staying still. Let's not turn our backs while a whole generation of young caregivers and child workers slips through the cracks of policy and politics, and worst of all, indifference. Because if we truly value care, we must value the people who give it, no matter what their age is. Now, if this episode moved you, please share it with a friend, or leave a review on Apple or Spotify or YouTube. You can find the links to the research I mentioned in the show notes. So let me ask you, how do you feel about using children as caregivers? I hope you'll leave a comment below because people need to hear this. And remember, don't just give care, share care. Thank you for listening this week. Until next time, this is Deborah Greenhut asking you to be concerned about kinship caregiving as pertains to childhood. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on The Caregiving Secret. You can dive deeper by picking up a copy of my pamphlet, Non-Negotiables for Caregivers. Go to my website, deborahgreenhut.com, and click on the link for Non-Negotiables for Caregivers. Until next time, keep sharing, keep caring, and remember, you're not alone on this journey.